What in the world just happened in Boston, Massachusetts? Was it something that we were not supposed to see and it just got let out? Because I could have sworn Florida State was supposed to go up there to play Boston College, but it looked like an imposter. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, what's coming up, Jordan Travis and his injury, and everything else that happened up there against Boston College.
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? This is Brian Smith. Thank you for coming into a post-game show. This is the first time I've gone live on YouTube and have no idea who's going to show up or what's going to happen. But I did a little research, which is definitely my style, based on the horrific 31-29, I believe it was. I mean, I'm still just blown away. Game that Florida State won over Boston College. It is a rather unique game on about 500 different levels. And quite frankly, I think that there's just needs to be kind of a narrowing right now. We'll talk some stats. First segment, talk a little bit about Jordan Travis, the lack of emotion, but how all of that culminates in segment 3. I want to talk a little bit about the, well, for lack of a better term, hopefully a wake-up call, because if they weren't awoken based on how they played today, they're going to get butchered at Clemson because they have nothing to lose because everybody's down on them. You play like you did today there, you will get absolutely slaughtered. There's no way around it. So with that being stated, a couple of key notes right off the bat. I said it 3 or 4 times in the last week that Florida State would be challenged against Thomas Castellanos. For anybody who hadn't seen him play, it was hard to put it in perspective. I've seen him live numerous times, high school and college. I knew what a freak he was. And he's a kid Florida State actually offered out of Ware County High School in the state of Georgia. He's a tremendous talent. But also, Florida State made him look like frickin' John Elway at points today. There's no nice way to say it, but it was just awful. It was just awful watching everything that was going on. I'm not really sure if Florida State could have done a poorer job in a couple of circumstances, whether it was a missed tackle, whether it was an opportunity to get up there and just at least force him to stay in the pocket instead of like getting on the edge and throwing it, whatever. Now, they made a few plays. Not saying they didn't, but Thomas and his stats are ridiculous. 20 of 33, 305 yards, 15 yards per completion. Like, I mean, there's just no way around it. That is horrific. And they did a really terrible job. Sometimes it was secondary. Sometimes it was the D-line. Sometimes it was the linebackers. There was fault to go around. And they still made some plays. Obviously, Lundy's interception was insane. Then good for Norvell, by the way, just to throw this in here. Given an opportunity, he scores the touchdown on the 1-yard fullback dive. That was cool. Hey, what's going on, Mike? How you doing, man? There's not much to say about the Florida State defense. They didn't heed my words, that's for sure. And I think that it's pretty interesting that people don't know much about him and just kind of take it for granted because Boston College's defense isn't very good. But Florida State had a couple offensive linemen banged up. They had zero motion. I'll go into that here in a minute. And quite frankly, they just sucked effort-wise today. They didn't. None bigger than Keon Coleman. That's something I'll talk about here in a second too. But he got taken out of the game a little bit, and I think Florida State got out-coached there. That's part of it. Obviously, BC had 18 penalties and barely lost. That's the stat of the day. Stat of the day. Florida State has conservatively twice as much talent. The other team had 18 penalties, yet the Noles won by 2. Those things do not compute. That is horrible. There is also something else that's very key to this. Florida State had them on the ropes when they did get that little run going, second quarter into the early third or whatever. and then they just took their foot off the gas. Now that's not a Norvell problem. That's not a coaching staff problem. That's a player-led problem, in my opinion. And here's why. Florida State has to want to knock teams out. One of the announcers made reference to, hey, you got them right here. You score again, you probably, knockout punch, jugular, something like that. The old phrase. Florida State didn't score again. I mean, they were awful down the stretch. Some kind of a penalty, a missed block, a poor pat, whatever. If anything they could do, just mental error, a lot of little things, just destroyed their chemistry. And they had, again, no energy, just dead. They didn't want to be there. And you can't win football games that way. You're going to lose anytime you play a game and you have even 10% less than the energy that you had. But they were lucky if they were at 50% of parts of today's game. So anyway, here's an example of that. Now, I know Thomas, again, I know him well, freak athlete. I knew they were going to have a hard time getting him to the ground. But how many sacks do you think the Noles had today without looking at the stat sheet? 1. They had 1 sack today. They had 1 freaking sack. And it wasn't even a defensive lineman. Verse had a few plays. He got around the ball. He was pretty aggressive, but they go out of their way to make sure he's not the game wrecker. They've got to have other defensive linemen show up and be better. BC's O-line's okay. It's not bad, but they're not as good as Florida State's front. I mean, they just wanted it more on some plays. And although they... what did they have, like 8 false starts or something? That is one of the weirdest offensive lines I've ever seen. But again, Deloach had a sack. He's the only guy that had a sack. And if you're in that circumstance where you can't be in this, 3rd and 8, 3rd and 7, whatever it is, they would have a penalty, but then Thomas Castellanos would hit a big pass or he would run. Florida State just constantly was just handing them money, free opportunity. So, and on the other side, when they had the ball, again, don't look at the stats. What do you think Florida State was on 3rd downs when they needed a play to continue? They were 2-9 against Boston College. I've got the stats here. Conversely, speaking of 3rd downs and all, just all these stats that I have in front of me, the 3rd down conversions, let's see, Florida State was 2-9. BC was 8-19. That's pretty respectable against the quality defense. It's got some NFL players. Here are a couple other stats. Red zone points, Florida State was good. That's the one thing they hammered, 5 for 5. They scored 31 points. It could have been better, but I mean, that's 4 touchdowns and a field goal. I mean, you're not going to bitch too much. They were also 1 for 1 on 4th downs. BC was 4 out of 5 on 4th downs. So between the two, and 24 attempts between 3rd and 4th, they hit 12 of 24, 50%. That's not good. Florida State lost 2 of their 3 fumbles. They didn't cause any fumbles. I mean, they were out possession time. Not that it's a huge deal in today's game, but 33-50 for BC just bled the game, and it should have been a 25-point game, and you won by 2. The other number here, and I'll get to the biggest culprit on this, and on that wife said a minute ago that Florida State was outcoached in part of the game. Florida State had 340 yards. The offensive line was a little banged up, didn't have the right guys to play as the starters, just injuries. But the running game was just okay. It was just okay. And Keon Coleman had 0 catches. 0. You're not going to win games with Keon Coleman having 0. You're not going to win games with guys that are your incredible playmakers not getting the ball. He had a reverse for like a yard or whatever, and it just wasn't blocked that well. That wasn't Keon's fault, but I'm sure they bracketed him on TV. You can't see the back end coverage, but for him not to have a catch, they obviously were doubling him. Florida State didn't adjust. That's on the coaches. Now, Johnny did come up. He had 4 catches for 105 yards. That's dope. He had 26.3 yards a catch. That's obviously tremendous, but that's not enough. It's just not enough. You can't be in that scenario. A couple of good notes here. My MVP for the Noles was Jaheim Bell. Obviously, he is a horse on a screen pass. I would not want to be the DB or the person that gets in there that does anything. That wouldn't be fun. And he's a pretty decent blocker, too. I think he's got a chance to get paid and play on Sunday. That is a good football player. The Noles were very fortunate to get him from South Carolina, who, by the way, while I'm sitting here, South Carolina is up 14-3 on Georgia at halftime. It's a weird world we live in. But anyway, I think that he was good. Obviously, Johnny, very good. The traditional run D, I'll get to Thomas Castellanos. I'll go back into that in a second, was pretty good. And then finally, when you kind of look at it, they made enough plays on defense. The one D interception was holy cow good. On your back, the wherewithal to catch that was tremendous. That was the one play they got. I said it before the game. I said, if you get Thomas contained in pressure, he'll throw it up. That's what young quarterbacks do. It's not a Thomas Castellanos issue. That's young quarterbacks. He's a true sophomore. He's not even old enough to go into a bar yet. He's a kid that's got to figure it out. It takes time. They forced that play and he threw it up. They got a pick. There just weren't enough of those. The bootlegs, I was surprised Florida State didn't have more pressures on the edge, and I was surprised they didn't bring nickel and corner pressures too. I don't know what the reason was. I'm not going to go into that, I'm sure, because they hate talking scheme to the public, but I would have made sure that he had only one side to go. You give Thomas Castellanos a two-way go, good luck. Again, I told everybody before this game, Thomas Castellanos is a freak, not a good athlete, a freak. He proved it today. He could line up at Florida State at receiver, free safety, corner, quarterback, or running back. He's that good an athlete. He's at Boston College, but I don't know how long that'll be either. But and yes, he is. You are right, Nicholas. He is a freak. I think that it's a really unique situation that Florida State got out of, because they probably should have lost the way they played. Just the fourth quarter, it was just garbage. So anyway, let's move to the second segment. If you want to, for those of you listening to this live or seeing this live or whatever on YouTube, I got my little segment up here. Second thing I put in there was Jordan Travis's energy and Florida State's lack of energy. Those were the two things. Part of the game plan for Florida State every week is to get Jordan on the edge, and he makes plays. And he's obviously a tremendous athlete too. I don't think he's quite as gifted as Thomas, like on a straight line, but he's pretty dang good. And after he got banged up, I don't think Florida State wanted to run him quite as much. And I don't think that, although he's a competitor, they had some plays where he was banging and trying to get in there and get some extra yards. They can't lose him. So that wakes up your offense in a different way. And I don't think they responded to that. And that's the lack of energy. And then the defense didn't pick them up they're up 21 points. And then BC gives them a gift with one of the worst coaching decisions I've seen. Down 9, they go for 2, kick the extra point, make it a 1-possession game. What was Boston College doing? That is just dumb as dirt. But whatever. That's Florida State getting an advantage there and taking care of it. I do want to talk about when I'll look at the numbers again, but like just from the eye test, Rodney Hill is a dude. I don't know like how you take Benson off the field because he's so consistent, but at the same time, Rodney Hill, when he gets the ball and he puts his foot in the ground and he takes around the corner, that's a different kind of cat now. He is not easy to get done in any way, shape, or form. Not easy at all. Excuse me. He is going to be an NFL player if he can understand pass protection in the passing game. Because the running game, he's getting better and better. And I just don't think that you're going to see him do anything to not get to that next level. They just got to find a way to get him more carries. Benson, obviously, he's really good, though. He had almost 5 yards of carry today, even though the offensive line was a little mismatched. Jordan Travis had a couple really nice runs, but they only ran him 4 times. This is the kind of game when you're getting banged on, you would like your stud athlete at quarterback to run, but after he got banged up, I get it. But even with Hill just having a few carries, you can just tell he's a little bit different. I think that's a guy they're going to be able to use more and more. And Toffoli's a pretty good receiver. I would use him more in the slot and doing different things or go 2 back. That's just me. I know Hill only had a few carries, but I'm telling you, he's got some juice to him. They need to find a way to get him involved more and early. His numbers will explode. The only other thing that I want to say about Florida State's offense before I go into the D is that you just can't replace offensive linemen. Even if there's talented guys in Florida State's depth on the O-line is tremendous. But you can't just be in a situation where guys are coming in and out of the lineup. It just doesn't work. I don't care what level it is. High school. I was at a couple of high school games, and one of the games I was at on Thursday was Orlando Jones. They were playing at Edgewater, and both teams were struggling some in the first half, and it was kind of an ugly game. But Edgewater's O-line had more chemistry. They ended up winning. Both teams had a ton of athletes, but the team had the better offensive line, won the game. The game I went to last night, Mainland against Reigns, the team with the better athletes, well, there really wasn't one. Both teams had Power 5 guys outside. Both guys had Power 5 guys on the line, too, defensively and whatnot. But the best overall O-line was Mainland, even though the best O-lineman on the game was Solomon Thomas, who Florida State is ardently recruiting. Class of 25 kid is the national recruit. But there's nobody even close to telling me that offensive line chemistry is not huge. And Florida State right now doesn't have it. It's okay, but I mean, locked in, everything's right. There were just too many times it was just stuffed. And BC does not have dudes up front. They don't. And Florida State pushed them around a little bit here and there, but then they would have like one guy get through. One guy would get a leg as Rodney Hill or Tofili or Benson or Jordan Travis, whatever the person was that ended up with the football, they were being bothered too many times close to the line of scrimmage, and it killed them. Instead of 2nd and 3, it's 2nd and 8. That's everything. So I don't know the situation with the injuries, but they need to figure that out to the best of their ability, especially coming up with Clemson. And here's why. I know that the head coach at Oklahoma is the old DC, Venables. He was, in my opinion, the most incredible blitz package from game to game guy in the last decade. They would not show something, and then they would go into a game, whether it was a big name opponent or whatever. They would find a weakness, in their opinion. Even if it was a guy who's a good player, they'd find one thing that he didn't do well, and they would run a specific type of blitz that made him uncomfortable until you were ready to puke. You had to adjust to them because they dictated the pace. Now, I know they don't have Venables anymore, but the way Florida State looked today, and Travis, I mean, he wasn't bad throwing the ball or anything, but they're going to try and do some different things. They have nothing to lose. Florida State's going to see all kinds of stuff. You know, the old adage, we're going to throw the kitchen sink at you. Florida State's about to see that. And I also think that, and I don't know, I just think they have to change it up a little bit with the play calling or something to make it easy for them. I don't know. They got to get Keon the ball too. They need some kind of juice. They never got into a serious rhythm. They were okay running the ball. I think just over 100 yards, which wasn't terrible, especially with, they were at 34 carries, 128 yards, but they had -17 for team carry, like when they were down on the ball or whatever. But for somebody like Benson not to even come close to getting 100 yards, that's an NFL player. I still think Rodney Hill is going to be even better, but 68 yards for Trey is not enough. Part of the reason is they were in situations they had to throw it more than they liked to, because on first down, sometimes they didn't get what they needed, or they were in a bad situation because of a penalty or whatever. They just found ways to be in goofy situations, especially in that second half when they got up 31-10. They lost all their momentum, and I don't really know what it is beyond the energy. So I'm just going to talk about that. If Florida State is going to compete with Michigan, Georgia, or anybody else for the national title, and right now, obviously, there's a lot of goofy things going on in college football, you have to find a way to want to murder lesser teams. And right now, Florida State is not in that category. They're not even in the stratosphere. That's on them. That is a nobody else but yourself problem. Florida State teams that I grew up watching, for the most part, there was an occasional exception. When they were up 35-10 at half, they won 56-13 or something. That Mickey Andrews defense, even when the reserves came in, obviously they had a lot of talent. That ain't debate. But the offense, whether they were running, whether it was a screen, whether it was a bomb, whether it was a dig, they were trying to score. every chance they got because those guys were competing for playing time and moving up the ladder. Today, I didn't see that out of the offense, especially in the second half. And defensively, again, they didn't have a defensive lineman with a sack. And I know Castellanos is great, but that's never acceptable. You can't have that many good football players like Fisk, etc., and not have a sack from your down 4. That doesn't get it. Finally, on the energy thing, I will give them credit. They made a few plays here and there that were key. And then, of course, the gift on the 15-yard penalty on the face mask, because we'll never know if Florida State's defense would have held up there at the end or not, or BC would have come down and gotten field goal range. But they weren't terrible either. The offense just put them in bad spots to a certain degree, and then they kind of got gassed, I think, in the second half. Last thing here before we start talking about the Clemson game. If you're going to be in a situation where you're in another game like this, at least allow this to be experience for you. They're going to play another team this year, maybe 2, that you should win by 20 or more. Bury them. Don't leave any doubt when you have them down. You have to put the hammer down. It's that simple. I ain't going to say any more on it. Now, how does this impact Clemson? How does this impact Florida State and the culmination of the game in Death Valley? That's what the third segment is, and then I'll wrap this up here in about 10 minutes. Pretty simple, man. This is a bad situation if you allow it to be, or it can be a really good one. I would lean towards Florida State being really hyped because people are going to dog them all week in the media. It's going to happen because it creates clicks and all that. I get it. But Florida State should use this as primary motivation, and they should just drop the hammer and beat the bejesus out of that narrative that they're against us. They should have locker room material and everything else saying ESPN or Fox or NBC, a writer for Deadspin, whatever. Some online, I don't care how obscure, Florida State staffers should be randomly posting stuff in the locker room when they come in from lunch or from a meeting. There should be something that is bright-eyed. So-and-so picks Clemson to beat Florida State. That should be in neon orange. Yes, I said orange for a reason. It's Clemson. They should absolutely try to do that. They certainly did motivate him for BC. Whatever they tried sucked. Let's go away from whatever the heck that was. Didn't work. So here's what I expect. Here's my early, for a basic view, my 2-second thought process on what to expect for Clemson. Part of this is I'm just going to assume Jordan Travis is good. I have no idea of knowing, and I don't care what Norvell did or didn't say after the game in the press conference. I've said it 100 times, and I will say it probably just about every podcast the rest of my life. Coaches lie like crazy about injuries anyway, and I don't care what they said. I mean, he hasn't been to the hospital to get it checked or anything, so I'd assume they brought him back in. He's okay, but even if he wasn't, they're not going to tell me. So they're going to have to attack and get Keon the ball early in the game. Clemson plays a different kind of defense than Boston College, obviously a different kind of level of talent that they sign at corner. I'm being very, very mild here. But they also have an incredibly unique situation because for whatever reason, the games that I've watched last year in this, Clemson doesn't have a takeaway corner, but they'll still play man. They need a big play in the game early. It could be a crosser to Bell. It could be a crosser to Coleman. It could be a crosser or a bomb or a 7-round, whatever, to Johnny. Johnny just finds a way to get down the field. That guy's incredible. But they have to hit a big play and keep Clemson from loading the box. Obviously, Florida State wants to run the football. That's their bread and butter, and they're tremendous at it. That's not going to change. But you can't be in 2nd and 7, 2nd and 8 against Clemson because I'm telling you, just like I told you, Thomas Castellanos was a dude. I will guarantee you that Dabo, he'll probably talk to Venables this week a couple of times. I would bet money on that. What would you do kind of conversation? They're going to dial up exotics that Jordan Travis has not seen. It is not going to be on film. I guarantee it. Bottom dollar. Florida State better be able to run against base fronts when they're not blitzing on 1st and 10. And even if it's 2nd and long, if they see it, they got to hit it. They cannot miss on those plays. So I would imagine that Florida State is going to work on the game plan from an inside-out perspective, meaning we got to take care of us. But they also got to work on something special for blitzes and certain hots, especially they got to get Keon involved. One-on-ones, I don't care if it's 3rd and 2. You got to think about going up top because you can take that crowd out of the game. Keon goes 75 on a fade ball and throws the guy to the ground and starts chucking on down on the sideline and scores. That'll make it real quiet in Death Valley real quick. I'm curious now if Florida State has anything else that they want to do. Slide protections, doing something different to worry about the blitz. I don't know if they'll really change it at all because it is a guessing game. Clemson's going to try different things. Their defense is okay, but it's not like it used to be, especially on the back end. They used to always have like an All-American candidate back there that takes over games. They've had some guys like listed in some of these magazines, but just from my eye test, watching them a little bit, they're not taking over games on the back end with any one player, which is obviously good for Florida State. And you can attack in different ways in one-on-ones. Florida State's receiving corps is humongous. You can get guys one-on-ones, you're going to win your vast majority. Plus, you got the pass interference call to consider. If you do not, key here, if you do not you're just not going to win that game without explosive. You got to win some of those. But, if you can just run downhill with Rodney and you can run downhill with Tafili and Jordan Travis a little bit on the edge and scooting around, picking up five, that's fine. But I still think you're going to need explosives in the passing game. One last thing before I get out of here. You got to find a way to get home with 4. Florida State's D-line stunk today in the pass game, and I know part of it was contain Thomas. They were average at it, even doing that, though. Cade Klubnik's a pretty darn good athlete, but he sure as hell is not Thomas Castellanos. He's as athletic a player as there is in college football. When you shake his hand, that is a grown man. And he is a freakishly athletic kid, 1 foot in the ground and go. He could play tailback at Alabama. He could play tailback at SC, Texas, Florida State, anywhere. He's that kind of athlete. He just happens to have a cannon for an arm, too. And he was pretty accurate today. But if they get to Cade, kind of like Klubnik, he's a sophomore, Castellanos. Klubnik is a sophomore. He's going to throw at least 1 up, if not 2. That's the difference in the game. That dumb, are you kidding me? As soon as you release the ball, you shouldn't have done it moment. Florida State needs to put Klubnik in that spot. If he's smart enough to throw it in the stand, you tip your cap. It's 2nd and 10. You move on. But my bet is, just like I said with Castellanos, if you let him get outside the pocket, he'll kill you. And he did. When they corralled him and got in his face and didn't let him shake him, what did he do? He threw it up. Interception. The one play that it was just awkward, he threw a jump pass. One of the dumbest decisions Thomas will probably make all year. That's what sophomore quarterbacks do. Florida State needs at least 2 of those plays in the game because even if they aren't interceptions, it'll make the Clemson sideline look at that and like, ooh, wait a minute. Now, it's not like they're not going to rely on Will Shipley anyway, but everybody knows he's going to get the ball. He's a dude. You can at least corral the running back easier. You know where he's at. It's pretty straightforward, and you're going to be trying to gang tackle him anyway. You need to find a way to get to the football and just gang tackle with that. But if you let Klubnik get on the edge where his running ability is good enough to get those 5 and 7 yard gains, make it 2nd and 5, 2nd and 3, and then occasionally pick up a 3rd down run that's pretty basic, then you're in trouble because then they got balance. That's what happened today at Boston College. Florida State stunk at keeping Thomas in the pocket when they really needed him to on 3rd downs or 2nd and long, whatever. You got to find a way to do that. So anyway, see what we got here in the chat. I'll check through here. Thanks for everybody for showing up. Anybody has any questions, I'm just kind of go through here and see what's going on. But yes, Rhinos, you're right. Florida State, I don't know what it is. Not that they're easy. FSU does struggle. I don't know what it is. They're just not. They're not so good with it. But that's the thing today. Like, you knew what he was going to do. This was an open book. He's not good in the pocket, reading post snap, 2nd and 3rd. That's hard. And he was 20 of 33 for 305 yards. I mean, he averaged literally 15 plus yards of reception. It's just terrible defense. So they lost contain. They didn't tackle well on the perimeter sometimes. It was a little everything. So that's brutal, man. What else we got here? Yeah. I think Rhinos is right. Throwing to open up the run game a little bit might help, even if it's a short passing game. That's what Rhino's talking about here in the chat. There's some truth in that. Jordan's pretty accurate. And I think they've got to find a way to get the slot receivers involved. That's something else I probably should have mentioned in the main part of the chat. But I mean, good Lord, they didn't do a very good job of being versatile. I brought up the question, I think it was this past week. Is it just two guys? Because it's obviously Johnny and it's Keon. And then there's just a little bit of here and there. And they used Jaheim today instead of Keon. But I think they need to throw it around to different guys a little more. Because when they bracketed, took Keon out, and then you knew your poison's going to be Johnny, and he ate him up. But they only got 4. Jaheim was the main guy. And again, he was my MVP in case you got in here a little late. That's not good enough, though. They don't have any slot receiver production. Matter of fact, did they have a slot receiver reception? And I'm not counting Jaheim Bell. I don't think they did. I mean, that's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. With all of Florida State's speed and everything else, I don't know if guys are banged up or if they're not preparing for it that way or if they just saw the game differently, but the staff isn't really looking at the slot position very much. I don't know what the deal is, man. Rhinos, yes, he did. Jordan did miss a few. I don't think that's the end of the world. But you can't miss those when your offense is not clicking. That makes it more important for your leader and your top dog to hit the home run. You've got to be able to do that. And when you do, let's just say he throws it in the flat to whichever guy it is. Winston catches the ball, makes one guy miss, and it's kind of that juke move. You're like, oh, that can ignite your sideline. That can ignite your offensive line. Florida State didn't have that play today. Not on one of those kind of like, ooh, look at that. There was one play where Hill ran around the right side that kind of got me juiced, and he got a nice run, but he didn't get the ball that much. He's the guy I really want to see with the ball in his hands more, but they need more wow plays with just one-on-one. I'm going to beat you. I have the ball. You can't tackle me. When I was growing up, Florida State had a ton of those guys. Remember how Corso used to say, Florida State's going to run through them, run around them, run by them. I don't see enough of that. That's my one concern with Florida State right now. They got to find a way to do that. And if they don't, well, quite frankly, that ain't going to work out real well. I'm going to check the score here. And I'm just curious because if Georgia loses to South Carolina, that will make my days. That's just hilarious. But it is what it is. Florida State, still what we're here to talk about. But I am here for South Carolina beating Georgia inside of Georgia's home stadium. That would be hilarious. Of course, Georgia scores 2 quick touchdowns, so probably not going to happen. I'd seen the game 14-3 at half, but whatever. The biggest thing now moving forward, though, what game plan, anybody wants to ask, fire away. What would you do to attack Clemson? If you want to keep it rolling here in the chat, that's something I'm fascinated with. What would you do? Would it be go vertical? Would it be more screen game, more short game, change the run game structure? You got to remember now, before you answer, they're not going to talk about it public. I'm telling you how coaches are. They will lie on their grandmother's grave. They are not going to talk about their quarterback's injury. They will lie all day long. But they're not going to want Jordan to run as much, which is a problem. They're not. So that is a big weapon that you're going to be at least somewhat mitigated. And they will be better after this. Yeah, they could be. Yeah, Bama. Bama is not Bama. Rhinos brought that up. They don't have a quarterback. Bama is going to lose at least one more, if not 2 more games. They can't score. I don't care how good your front is, you can't win without quarterback play. And I don't know how this happened. They're starting a true freshman at left tackle. Alabama is not going to win a lot of games playing true freshman at left tackle, just like not many other teams are. Orlando Pace is still the best offensive lineman I've ever seen in my lifetime. He started right away at Ohio State in the mid-90s. Okay, that's Orlando Pace. There's been 2 or 3 other guys like him since, and that's about it. It's not good. They can't run the ball consistently, and their passing game is garbage. So, and they don't have a guy, it surprises me, that they can get the football to outside. That's a scary guy right now. They don't have any chemistry with the quarterback. I think they got some athletes, but Alabama's got problems. Back to Florida State, though. What would y'all do? Would it be short passing game against Clemson? I think that's going to be part of what I'd say, because I don't trust Clemson's corners. And I'm not, just take Florida State out of the equation. I don't trust Clemson's corners at all. And I don't really trust anything with them in regards to making a big play in a moment that they should, because they just got beat by freaking Duke a couple weeks ago. I'm sorry, but the eye test is the eye test. They just found ways to screw it up, like worse than what Florida State just did. I don't trust them. I think that Florida State can throw short, catch some footballs underneath, and be pretty balanced, and make it hard for Clemson to do what I was talking about in the main section before I really started talking to everybody here in the chat. I expect Clemson to come up with some diabolical blitz package stuff. I expect Dabo to speak with Venables, and I expect, they got good coaches anyway, to come up with stuff that Jordan has not seen yet on film. They're going to do that, and they're going to try to hit him to get him out of his game, just like you would any other, but it's different when you're coming off injury. Jordan Travis is a warrior, but he's human too. He was an obvious freaking pain here, man. So let's see how that goes. I agree. Rhino says, let's spread them out and 4 wide and still run. I think you can run some RPO out of that could hit home runs. But that goes back to something else, to his point. Rhino's talking about you could go twins to each side, quarterback draw, even if he's about to take a hit and you just slide and get 4 or 5 yards, it's still ahead of the chains. And you could also do RPO with that, or Jordan go around the end, pull it, and you've got a ridiculous amount of running back talent. Any of those 3 running the ball, I'm good. That's probably a good idea. They have to get Jaheim the ball some. He had 75 yards today and a score. He's a dude, and they got Keon involved with that. I'm just hoping they can get one of the big receivers the football on a quick slant, something moving forward, shallow cross, an over, where their size punishes one of those Clemson guys early in the game. That would be the nice bonus. And then after they do that, you're going to have an opportunity, in my opinion, to really kind of put them on their heels, because Clemson's going to want to be aggressive. They have not done well, at least from what I've seen, when their secondary is playing passive the last year or so. Those DBs have a bad play and they collapse. They've been mentally weak in a couple of the games I saw last year. I didn't pay as much attention to them in the Duke game because I knew Riley Leonard, the Duke quarterback, he's really good. He's a really good player. He kind of went underrated. He was a basketball kid that kind of decided on football a little later. And man, he's a good football player. But Jordan Travis, 5th-year senior, he's a guy he understands the deal. Florida State should be in great shape there. They're going to make the right decisions for the most part on where the ball should go. You just got to get your guys who are going to be bigger, who are guys that have had more success, talking about Johnny and Keon in particular. They should win those one-on-one matchups against Clemson secondary. I don't even think it should be that close. And it may not be a total yardage thing. It's more about situations. 3rd downs, the opportunity to hit 3rd and 7 from the 7. It's 3rd and goal at that situation. If you score on one of those 50-50 balls in that scenario, you suck the life out of Death Valley. And you can hammer it home at that point. That's a really important thing to do. The only other thing with that is, you just can't give them a freebie either. Don't take a stupid chance. Just wanted to mention that. But the other thing that I'm curious about, and unless somebody else has another question, I'm going to wrap it up here in a sec. But the only other thing I'm curious about, does Clemson have anybody, if anybody knows, throw it out there in the chat or whatever. Is there another player emerging? Because Will Shipley's tremendous. I'm not denying that. He can pass block, he can catch, he's a great runner, he's got great effort. Very good young man, too. I know him, he's a good football player. But do they have another guy that scares anybody? Not just a good player, but like he's a next level dude. They got a couple kids. That receiver last year, that freshman was pretty good, but I don't know if he's doing much this year. That's a good question, Rhinos. I don't know. Is he healthy? Does anybody know? Is Fabian healthy? That's a great question because he certainly doesn't appear to have done very much. I don't know if there's anything like they've got to figure out the slot. I mean, it's going to be something I work on. I don't know what to talk about it here. I got to do some research. But Florida State slot play has been non-existent. Dustin hasn't done much. I don't know injuries. And again, they're not going to give you much information. If somebody's hurt, they're probably just not going to talk about it. What are you going to do? That's the way it goes. I would try to find a way, if nothing else, maybe that, and Tofili played some slot. That tells me something. I bet there's some injury situations. But they're going to have to do that to offset what Clemson's going to do, or else they'll play a bigger player in the slot, like a true linebacker, and make it even harder to run the ball. Because then your slot receiver / running back, like Tofili, if he's going up against a guy that's 228, 235 or something, he's not going to run block real well on that, on outside zone, and that's no good. You have to be able to force them to change their personnel when you go 3 and 4 wide. If not, you're in deep, deep trouble. Clemson's got enough athletes. Linebackers are one spot. They got dudes. They got some serious dudes, Carter in particular. I think that Florida State should be able to run the ball pretty good, though, as long as the slot position isn't something that Clemson just goes all out in. Hedges with the outside linebacker kind of going that direction and playing in space very little and playing downhill. That's Florida State has to be able to throw behind that and get it in one-on-ones. So that's about it. Well, I'm going to wrap it up here. I'm going to be talking about on Monday. We'll get into it more. I'm going to do a pretty casual podcast on recruiting tomorrow, later in the day, maybe. I haven't decided exactly how I'm going to do Sunday, but I'm going to have some fun with that. Monday, we'll get into the back end of the routine, talk some about all the different stuff that Florida State did wrong and all that in a kind of a snippet, but it's really about on to Clemson. You know, the famous line, we got beat. It's on to this team, on to Cincinnati or whatever it was that Belichick said several years ago. Well, that's what this is. Florida State can't change the fact they played like crap, because they did play like crap. I would imagine they've got to find a way to change up their game plan a little bit. It doesn't have to be drastic. They just got to execute better more than anything. I know that's the boring answer, but I'm going to talk about execution. Going to talk about some matchups, give some information on some of the key players for Clemson. And then hopefully we get by, let's say, Wednesday, some kind of injury information has come out. I wouldn't put a lot of stock in that, but I'm actually more interested than I am in Jordan, because he came back and played. Is anybody for Florida State at slot or offensive line going to be in the lineup or play more than they did against BC? Because if not, yeah, Wayne, you are correct. A win is a win. There is no doubt about that. 2 points, still a victory. Jakai, yeah, that's a lot. But they're not playing these guys and getting them the ball. That's all I'm saying. It's a slot they got to figure out. It's been non-existent. So we're going to talk about it, go through the week. It'll be a pretty heavy game week for the 5 main shows during the Monday through Friday. Prediction Friday, as always. But I'll get some recruiting in. I went and saw 2 of the kids that Florida State is really going after, in Xavier Mincy and LJ McCray last night. They play for Mainland. I interviewed both of them after the game. That was a blast. I'll talk some about that on Sunday, but going to be pretty much a game prep week and kind of go from that. So, yeah, that's fumbles are not very helpful. You can't give up touchdowns that way, but it is what it is. Anyway, I appreciate everybody. I'm going to be doing live shows most of the time after games if I'm in town or whatever. If I'm not traveling to a game or whatever, it's a little harder when you're going back and forth to a hotel if I go to a game or whatever. But this is fun. I'm going to try to get to a point where I have live shows all the time down the road. But obviously, I've just been doing this podcast for about a month. We'll get there. But anyway, thank you very much. Everybody have a great day. had a fun, and we'll talk to you next time.